Discover the inspiring journey. He went to buy meat and found an incredible Apache widow's love. Jake Donovan took a deep breath as he stepped into the small metal shed, the scent of aged leather and cool steel filling his lungs. Today was just another ordinary Tuesday, or so he tried to convince himself. He placed his order with old Fred, the meat supplier, knowing full well that behind every cut there were judgments waiting to be carved. Being a butcher in Flathead, Montana, felt like wrestling shadows. The trades he mastered stayed tethered to the past, while his childhood friends climbed the corridors of corporate ladders. What was the world coming to where slicing meat was seen as anything less than noble? As he waited for his order, visions of a life outside these cold walls clouded his mind. The boardroom accolades, family dinners with stories echoing through polished homes. Did he foolishly anchor himself to the rust and blood of a butcher shop? Moments later, Jake caught sight of her. Lena, the Apache widow he'd met a month ago while restocking the market. Her spirit seemed to vibrate in the air with the weight of her history, and he felt an odd sense of peace wash over him as they exchanged smiles. But beneath that fleeting solace, unease bloomed. His feelings for Lena were forbidden in a town that had looked at him with disapproving eyes since childhood. The whispers he sensed every time they crossed paths knifed deep into his heart. Should he raise his voice against the townsfolk, defending something and someone he believed in, or keep his head down, deny his own worth in a culture that saw his profession as subservient? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The tension grew like a thick fog rolling over Flathead as they began to deepen their connection. He shared stories of his late younger brother, the guilt that trailed him like a shadow. Lena spoke of her husband, the illness that had hollowed out her heart. In their shared grief, they began to rise, yet the weight of Jake's upbringing sat heavy on his chest. Could they cultivate something beautiful amid such decay? Each time he returned to his shop, the townsfolk's glances stung. Was it the sweat on his brow from the meat trade? Did they see him as less than, even as his hands carved life from the dead? As he watched Lena enter the shop that day, intent on helping for the local market, he felt a swell of dread. What if they hurled their judgments at her, as they had so many times to him? Would he have the courage to defend her? He knew the risk of standing up for Lena might mean losing everything, a family business built from decades of labor, the only identity he understood. But as an ugly scene began to unfold, tension coiled in him, hearts raced, breaths quickened. Could he endure silence any longer? Irregular thoughts spiraled outwards. Loyalty to kin and community held him back, but love whispered fiercely at his core. Caught in a reckoning, he looked around the shop. Each familiar face came loaded with expectation, tightening like a vice around his throat. Would he cling to tradition and turn away, or would he embrace the sacredness of love? The choice burned deep within him as he prepared to act. Heart thundering, fear creeping, he stood on the precipice, questioning everything he thought he knew and who he truly was. Jake stared into the faces of the townsfolk surrounding him, measuring their anticipation against the pulse of fear in his veins. The atmosphere buzzed with unspoken reproaches and thinly veiled judgments. Every glance was an accusation, and he felt like a spectator in his own life, trapped between the weight of expectations and the flicker of newfound desire. In the heart of the shop, he felt the ambient heat mixing with the coolness of the stored meats, a juxtaposition that mirrored his internal struggle. Instead of wallowing in self-doubt, he summoned a surge of resolve. Memories of Lena flooded his thoughts, the way her laughter had illuminated the darkest corners of his grief, the fierce wisdom in her eyes that dared him to dream beyond this place. "Lena," he said, breaking the weighty silence and drawing her gaze, "are you okay?" The tremor in his voice surprised him, but she nodded, her expression steadying him. He hesitated, conscious of the scornful eyes that had witnessed his every moment of hesitation, like a tightrope walker without a net. "Listen, Jake, don't." Lena's whisper cut through the array of nervous energy. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for." The gentle strength of her words ignited a defiance within him. The love simmering between them had grown roots deep into the soil of their shared pain, yet society clung to its rigid structures, attempting to sever their bond. As she glanced around the shop, a flicker of concern caught in her eyes. He sensed the weight she carried, navigating this town with its perilous judgments, and he couldn't ignore that any longer. He took a step closer, the familiar space between them feeling both suffocating and freeing. In that moment, something inside him cracked open, revealing a raw and heartfelt confession. "I won't let them speak about you like that anymore. I won't stand by." Lena's brow furrowed, caught off guard by his sudden decisiveness. "But what about the business, your family?" Jake recoiled, grappling with the tangled threads of loyalty to his past versus his yearning for a future. The thought of losing the butcher shop felt daunting, but with it came the realization that holding on to it while ignoring the truth risked all he held dear. He was, after all, more than a butcher. He was a man capable of love. Each heartbeat flared with clarity, breaking the spell of insecurity that had haunted him. "This is my life," he replied, his voice low but firm. "No more living for someone else's approval." At that instant, he decided to push against the gravitational pull of expectations. The townsfolk might not understand him. They might never see the beauty in the craft he considered sacred. But if he didn't stand up for what he believed in, he was simply fading into a narrative written by others. The tension in the air swirled. Decisions loomed like storm clouds. As he turned to address the gathered crowd, a whisper of courage filled the space between his thoughts. "I want to talk about what matters to me, about the community we build together." For a moment, silence reigned, charged with uncertainty. Their astonished faces shared a forgettable blend of disbelief and dormant hostility. The line between acceptance and judgment rested on the tipping point, hovering like an unseen balance. But beneath the strain of apprehension, a sense of purpose ignited within him. Jake felt his voice gather strength, the realization dawning that it had been silenced for far too long. Could this be the moment to reshape not just his life, but the community around him? Then, just as he prepared to speak with conviction, a familiar face stood at the entrance, the mayor. Jake instinctively recognized the stir of authority he embodied. What he had just begun to articulate teetered on the brink of interruption. The time had come to face not only his own truths, but potentially the very embodiment of the town's oppressive legacy. Would he seize this moment, or would the past hold him captive once more? The mayor's presence cast a long shadow over the gathering, a symbol of the constraints that had traditionally governed Jake's life. Each footstep he took echoed with authority, yet it was the unseen weight of expectations that pressed down on Jake, compelling him to confront a man whose very persona encapsulated the town's rigid mindset. As the mayor approached, examining the crowd, Jake's heart raced. "Jake," the mayor began, his voice smooth like the summer air, yet laced with veiled contempt. "I hope you're not stirring trouble in my town today." The words hung in the air as he regarded the townsfolk who had all but anchored Jake to their narrow expectations. Jake clenched his fists, fighting the instinct to retreat into silence. He could either dissolve into conformity or stand up and instigate change. He could feel Lena's eyes on him, willing him not to shy away. "No, sir," he replied, his voice steady despite the quaking inside. "What I want is to speak openly about what matters." "Openly?" The mayor's brow arched, curiosity giving way to a condescending smirk. "And what exactly might that be? Your passion for butchering and the community you want to build?" The laughter that erupted from some townsfolk stung, but Jake clung to his resolve. This was more than a declaration. It was about asserting his identity and challenging the oppressive norms that had kept him bound for so long. "Yes, the community. My community, one where understanding replaces judgment." The mayor's expression shifted, a mixture of intrigue and defiance dawning. "You think you can reshape this town? You think a butcher's opinion holds weight against tradition?" He leaned in, his presence overwhelming. "Your place is in this shop, and you know it." Jake took a breath, centering himself. "And yet I stand here, sir, because I refuse to accept that my life can be dictated by others' opinions any longer." The words unfolded from him like a wave breaking against the shore, each syllable a reinforcement of his growing courage. As the crowd quieted, moments from his past materialized, times he had been all but invisible, a ghost in his own life, conforming for the sake of peace and tradition. But he felt something shift within. The power of a hidden resolve began to awaken. The mayor's eyes narrowed. "Jake, what are you really after? Is it Lena? Is this some childish rebellion against your family's legacy?" The question cut deeper than Jake anticipated. Backed into a corner, he felt the familiar tug of familial expectations. Yet, instead of retreating, he leaned into the discomfort. "It's about more than a relationship. It's about being authentically myself and not cloaked in shadows of who others expect me to be." Firmness radiated from him, not just to the mayor but to everyone who stood in judgment. In that moment, he saw the faces before him not as enemies, but as potential allies who might just be waiting for someone brave enough to lead them. "Lena and I have faced enough hostility for merely existing in our truth," he continued, gathering momentum, each word punctuated by the tension in the air. "We deserve more than whispers behind closed doors. We deserve respect and understanding. Every one of us does." Jake's voice resonated, sparking a subtle shift in the crowd. He realized now that his personal development was intertwined with the collective challenges they faced. His success hinged upon theirs. Suddenly the mayor's demeanor shifted. He had retreated slightly, perhaps taken aback. "You can't just change this town overnight, Jake. Change is not an overnight miracle, but a series of small steps taken every day," Jake countered, emboldened. "If I don't start standing for my truth, then I remain nothing more than a footnote in a story I didn't write." As he spoke, Jake understood that he was not alone in this fight. Fragmentation only existed within fears that could be shattered by shared understanding and courageous unity. He cast a glance toward Lena, whose unwavering gaze felt like the wind beneath his wings. The mayor hesitated, weighing his response as tension hung heavily, ready to unravel. Would he dismiss Jake's call to courage or find a spark of reason in the blaze of change? The choice before them loomed large, taut with possibilities. For Jake, the moment was exhilarating, a turning point marked by the realization that reclaiming his life meant confronting every antagonism head-on. And yet, as the mayor's expression softened into contemplation, Jake could sense the winds of change building around him. Just then, a commotion arose at the back of the shop, and the door swung open. A figure emerged, casting a long shadow across Jake's newfound conviction. All eyes turned, setting the stage for an unexpected twist that could either elevate or doom his fragile momentum. As the crowd parted, Jake's heart raced anew, uncertainty flooding in like ice water. The figure stepping into the light was a tall woman, her long, dark hair cascading in waves. Striking features marked with resilience, she exuded an undeniable strength. She scanned the faces around her, her gaze landing on Jake, igniting something deep within him, a flicker of empowerment born from connection. "Jake," she said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency, "I think it's time we talked." The mayor shifted, visibly irritated. "And who might you be? This is a closed gathering," he asserted, attempting to reinstate control. "I'm Anaya," she replied evenly, undeterred. "But today, I'm here as a voice for those too long silenced by tradition." Her words hit Jake like the first rays of dawn breaking through the night. He realized Anaya wasn't just speaking for herself. She embodied a collective fight pushed down deep by fear and expectation. "Why are you here?" Jake managed to ask, still grappling with the surprise of her presence. "I've heard whispers of your struggle," she said, directly addressing the simmering tension. "You want change. I see the alignment in our spirits, the strength to challenge this town's remnants of outdated thinking. This is what we need." Something powerful surged within Jake, a sense of shared purpose. He felt Lena's presence beside him, bolstering his confidence. "I'm ready to harness it," he affirmed, turning to Anaya. "But do you believe the town is ready for this?" Anaya's gaze pierced the room filled with wary townsfolk, their eyes wide with mix of intrigue and skepticism. "They can be. It starts with us showing them that we're not afraid to live our truth. When we stand united, even the strongest walls can crumble." The mayor, struggling to maintain authority, scoffed. "You're just two outsiders caught in a fantasy. The nature of this town is not in your hands." Jake felt the stirrings of defiance within him. Anaya's arrival was swiftly unraveling the mayor's grip. "No more fantasies," he countered firmly, his voice resonating through the gathering. "It's about establishing our reality, not merely dreaming it." Anaya stepped closer, her energy electric. "Every change begins with a single voice willing to speak against injustice, Jake. We need to organize, hold discussions rather than allowing rumors to dictate our lives." A poignant silence enveloped the room as townsfolk exchanged glances. What she spoke was radical, unsettling, yet there was a palpable hunger for something more than what had been offered. As she continued, her words clung like a promise in the air. "Let's not just talk about change. Let's create a foundation that allows for our stories to be told, that respects individuality rather than suppressing it." Jake felt a surge of possibility. He caught a glimpse of Lena's approving nod, her unwavering support framing his newfound resolve. "You're right," he said, nodding towards Anaya. "Collective strength brings about collective change. We must stir the pot, get the conversations flowing." For the first time, Jake felt a coherent plan formulating in his mind, not just empty rhetoric, but actionable steps toward liberation. "What's next?" he asked, eager to solidify this unexpected alliance, aware that the future added layers of tension atop his previous confrontation with the mayor. Anaya grinned, and the spark in her eyes ignited Jake's vision further. "We start with a gathering, bring together those who seek understanding and challenge misconceptions. We'll create a safe space where stories can overlap and fuse into a communal call for equity." But as they firmed up plans, Jake couldn't shake the nagging thought that this was just the beginning. Unease brewed in the depths of his mind. Was he ready to stake everything on this newfound purpose? Would the townsfolk accept his invitation toward change, or would they close ranks, shielded by their conservative ways? As he watched Anaya's assured demeanor and Lena's unwavering support, he felt the enormity of his decision looming, one that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. Just then, the door swung wide again, and a small group of familiar faces appeared, hesitant but stirring with curiosity. The air crackled with potential, and in that charged moment, Jake realized he stood on the precipice of something monumental. His fight, now shared and amplified, demanded every ounce of his courage. But would he be able to face what would come from embracing this new alliance? The possibilities stretched wide, a daunting frontier filled with both opportunity and risk. Would they all step into the unknown together? Jake stood amidst the muffled chatter in the dimly lit room, a sudden flood of energy coursing through him. The curiosity of the new arrivals, familiar faces from town, pierced through his moment of self-doubt. Each one carried the weight of history, the stubborn echo of opinions formed and reformed over years in a rigid community. But here they came, looking to him, ready to absorb whatever tremors this conversation ignited. "Let me guess," Jake said, forcing a smile. "You folks came to see the spectacle." The attempt at levity fell flat, but it broke the ice. Faces softened, curiosity mingled with skepticism, and he felt the delicate shift in dialogue becoming tangible. Anaya noticed and took a step closer to him. "Every great shift begins with a conversation," she whispered, nudging him forward. Jake felt the crowd's expectancy urging him onward. "Look," he began, his voice steady yet inviting. "I know it seems like we're just two voices against a mountain of tradition." A building confidence spirited him, toughening his resolve as he spoke. But that mountain can shift. Change doesn't require a majority, it requires willingness. He locked eyes with a few people, anchoring his thoughts against the horizon of their doubt. "For too long, our stories have been trapped. Today we can start revealing them, peeling back the layers of fear. Each story matters. Each voice is valuable, even if it whispers against the tide." The hesitation he perceived in the crowd began to waver, replaced by an incipient hope that blossomed like a desert bloom in spring. He could sense their yearning for something more, though the mayor's voice still loomed large nearby like a dark cloud over a scorching day. The mayor's skepticism pushed at Jake's shoulders. "And what are these stories going to accomplish?" he barked, his attempted dominance melting under the weight of an awakening crowd. Jake inhaled deeply, mentally discarding the mayor's formidable presence. "They'll accomplish what we've failed to do alone," he declared. "They'll shed light on our reality, our desires, and most critically, they'll remind us how to stand together." A murmur erupted in the crowd, a soft ripple of excitement, of recognition. He turned to Anaya, who had an impressed smile dancing on her lips. Jake noticed it then. He was no longer just reacting to this situation. He was orchestrating it, shaping the narrative by pulling everyone together. "Before we meet again," Anaya suggested, seamlessly slipping into their planning, "let's set up small discussions around town. One-on-one, small groups. Allow a safe harbor for opinions, support systems." Jake nodded, her confidence infectious. Each word drew him deeper into a realm he had never envisioned for himself, a leader of thought, a weaver of connections among those who'd felt voiceless. But an inkling of fear jolted him. What if he invited confrontation instead of unity? What if the fissures in their divided beliefs ran too deep to traverse? "Will it matter?" he asked, urgency threading through his thoughts. "Will we make a difference?" Anaya's expression softened. She grasped his arm. "You're already making a difference, Jake. It starts with one voice willing to speak. Remember, the bond we forge in vulnerability is our strength." Those words clung to him, and he could feel Lena's encouragement wrapping around his thoughts. He couldn't back down now. Each new exchange would be an opportunity to refine his voice, his purpose, and most significantly, his self-perception. The group began to disperse, aglow with newfound energy. Some offered tentative smiles, others waved, but all left a seedling of anticipation swirling in the air. As he stood with Anaya and Lena, the gravity of his challenge hung palpably in the room. Each fleeting possibility played like a film reel, a highlight of conversations bold and dangerous, voices brittle and defiant, all wrapped in the urgency of a coming storm. Jake knew there was no turning back. He was about to step deeper into the unfolding chaos of his own convictions, a labyrinth that could lead to empowerment or rupture. The path lay ahead, jagged and uncertain. "Are you ready to face the consequences?" Anaya asked, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of determination and fear. He clenched his fists, heart pounding in his chest. "I guess we'll find out together." As the last remnants of doubt teased their way through his mind, he recalled the faces of those who would stand with him, ready or not. But as he walked out into the gathering dusk, a promise settled in his chest. Change would happen. The town was waking, and so was he, bracing for the waves of truth and backlash. What lay around the corner would not be a simple discussion. It would demand every ounce of resolve he possessed. The confrontation with traditionalism loomed, echoing the moment he'd least expected would redefine him. Would his voice stand strong against the tide? Dusk settled around Jake as he stepped into the cool evening air, the distant chatter of the departing crowd still echoing in his ears. The warmth of camaraderie was replaced by a chill of uncertainty that coursed through him. Each step felt weighted, like a heavy anchor dragging through the depths of his newfound responsibilities. Anaya and Lena flanked him, their presence a steady reminder of the support he had. Yet, what had begun as a moment of revelation now morphed into the pressure of expectation. He realized that he was no longer just a participant in the evolving narrative of his community. He was becoming a pivotal character, and the stakes were impossibly high. "How do we start?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly, revealing the rawness of his nerves. The words spilled forth, tainted by an undercurrent of anxiety. "We set up those small discussions first," Anaya replied, her tone buoyant yet pragmatic. "Begin where it feels comfortable. It's about nurturing safe spaces for real voices to emerge." Jake nodded, but the skepticism lingered just beneath his surface. He pictured the conversations to come, how easy it would be for old prejudices to erupt, to suffocate the hope he had inspired. There was a possibility of failure, one that could swallow him whole. "What if they reject us?" he asked, fear threading into his mind. "What if we open these channels only to find more divides?" "Then we tackle the divides head-on," Lena interjected, her expression fierce. "Every time we encounter resistance, we ask why. That's the key, Jake. It's about understanding the roots, not just the branches, and that requires courage to go beyond the surface. Jake absorbed her words, each of them an anchor in murky waters. Courage was something he had never felt himself possess in abundance, yet here it was, asking to be summoned. As the days rolled on, Jake found himself organizing the very discussions that had once filled him with trepidation. He prepared lists of potential topics: fear, change, hope, but each piece of paper felt like a magic spell with unpredictable outcomes. The fear of inadequacy loomed large, gnashing its teeth, ready to choke him at any moment. Yet temptation lay in the push. He was organizing events, crafting narrative threads that would bind unfamiliar voices into a tapestry of understanding. In clandestine bars and snug coffee shops, he watched as individuals slowly emerged from their shells, revealing stories that echoed with hardship and resilience. There were nights defined by laughter and others drenched in sorrowful reckonings. With each encounter, his initial hesitations began to wane, challenged by genuine connections that replaced doubt with determination. He learned to listen, to validate, to navigate the complexities of feelings surfacing among those he once knew only in passing. Yet even in these milestones, an undercurrent of tension remained, a constant reminder that not all would embrace this shift. The mayor's remnants of skepticism reared like a ghost beneath the surface, potentially waiting to disrupt their fragile progress with bitter opposition. One evening, after an unexpectedly powerful session on individual fears, Jake stood alone, immersed in thought. People had poured their hearts, sharing dark fears of judgment and loss. Jake felt the weight of those stories pressing against his chest, transformative yet daunting. Was he truly capable of steering this ship? Would he be the catalyst for a greater understanding, or merely a pawn for someone else's agenda? Doubts twisted like vines, nearly choking the winding paths of his ambition. That night, he received a text from Anaya. "Our next step is critical. Be prepared. We may need to confront the mayor directly soon." Jake's heart raced at the anxiety of such a possibility. How would he stand against someone rooted in tradition with the authority to silence their voices? The confrontation loomed large, an inevitable moment that could either solidify his role as a leader or find him crumbling under pressure. Fueled by uncertainty, he grasped the phone tightly, contemplating the repercussions of what lay ahead. The moment was approaching, the moment that would determine not just his path, but the very future they hoped to cultivate amidst the patchwork of voices vying for recognition. Would he be ready to confront the shadows of tradition with clarity and resolve? Determination surged through him. Ready or not, this was the crossroads of his journey. The days that followed were a whirlwind, an intense oscillation between elation and dread. Jake immersed himself in every detail, dissecting potential scenarios as he prepared to meet the mayor. Whispered conversations filled his mind, each greater than the last, swirling around his thoughts, amplifying his anxiety. Every interaction, every shared narrative colored his perception of leadership, shifting it from a distant ideal to something tangible, something he was desperately striving to embody. He felt an evolution within himself, a subtle awakening of potential that had long remained dormant. Yet, as the anticipated day approached, he could almost taste the irony of it. The more he embraced his role, the heavier the weight on his shoulders felt. Each evening, after sessions that ignited a flicker of hope in hearts burdened by despair, he returned home grappling with the remnants of shared stories. The laughter from joyous revelations clashed with the quiet sorrows that often slipped under the radar. How was he supposed to capture the essence of those nights and present it to the mayor? Late one night, staring at the ceiling, Jake felt an inkling of resolve. He grabbed his notepad and scribbled his thoughts mercilessly. Empathy, honesty, forward motion. These weren't merely words, they were strategies. If he could channel these attributes into his approach, perhaps he could mitigate the confrontation, spin it from conflict into cooperation. He began drafting a speech meant to pave the way for dialogue rather than opposition. Words flowed onto the page as he relinquished a piece of that heavy doubt. The longing for understanding outshone his fear, and in that moment, he recognized that every narrative he had cultivated over the past weeks was clutching at the threads of change. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with hues of orange and red. Jake stood before a gathering of friends, Anaya and Lena among them, sharing the insights he'd devised for the impending meeting. There was a newfound authority in his voice, a subtle shift that surprised him. He was no longer asking for validation. He was proclaiming his intentions. "I want to make the mayor see us as we are," he asserted, the conviction solidifying with each uttered syllable. "I want him to acknowledge the complexity of our stories, the weight of our hopes. If we can shift his perspective, we can weave together the broken threads of our community." Lena leaned forward, her eyes bright. "That's the spirit, Jake. If you present these narratives with openness and passion, you'll invoke a sense of responsibility within him. People can't ignore authenticity." As they gathered their thoughts around him, Jake felt a swell of unity, a bond crafted from shared stakes. For the first time in weeks, clarity began to wash over his tangled fears. He was not merely fighting for recognition. He was cultivating understanding, shaping dialogues that could carry on like echoes long after their moment of confrontation. As the meeting drew closer, Jake practiced verbalizing their journey into existence. He envisioned each story, each face that had shared their truth, and how those narratives could weave into a fabric too resilient to disregard. But as he stood in front of the mirror rehearsing, a creeping thought lingered in the corners of his mind, an unsettling question nestled deep within. What if the very authenticity he sought to showcase fell on deaf ears? The anticipation coiled tightly around him, amplifying every heartbeat. He knew a moment of vulnerability loomed, threatening to shatter the resolve he painstakingly crafted. Was the ambition driving him forward about to lead to his undoing? With one last glance in the mirror, Jake opened the door to face what lay beyond. A confrontation not just with the mayor, but with the shadows of his own inadequacies. The dawn awaited him. Beyond it lay the culmination of his journey. Would he emerge as a transformative force, or be swept away by the currents of tradition? The answer would unfold in the hesitant breaths of a decisive moment. Jake stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the chill a stark contrast to the tempest brewing in his heart. The fear of misrepresentation loomed larger than the shadows cast by the rising sun. Each step further from his front door felt like a tug of war between his aspirations and the phantom of self-doubt tracing his heels. As he walked towards the town hall, he replayed his carefully scripted speech in his mind, picturing the faces of those he was representing, faces etched with hardship yet illuminated by hope. Crossing the threshold into the building, he was met with the hum of activity. Staff scurrying by, phones ringing incessantly, and the faint cacophony of nearby meetings painted a picture of a community grappling with its own complexities. Yet amidst this organized chaos, Jake felt like an outsider, marooned by the very ideals he sought to champion. The tremor of uncertainty in his hands betrayed the words he had rehearsed. Settling himself in the waiting area, he observed others. A mix of seasoned officials and anxious citizens peppered the seats. A sense of disconnect settled over him. An elderly man sitting across from him glanced over, nodding slightly, perhaps sensing the turmoil swirling within Jake. "You won't find what you're not willing to share," the man offered cryptically before returning his gaze to the floor. Jake blinked, absorbing the weight of the statement. Just then, the door to the mayor's office creaked open and a robust voice called his name. Jake's heart raced as if trying to escape its confines. He rose and moved forward, heart pounding against his ribs like a child eager to launch into the unknown. But with each step closer, he felt the weight of his authenticity beginning to fracture under the pressure of expectations. Once in the mayor's office, Jake was struck by the paradox of the polished decor and the imperfection he knew lay beneath every surface. The mayor stood, an imposing figure with an air of authority bolstered by the knowledge of political mechanics. "Jake, good to meet you. Let's get straight to the point," he said, motioning for Jake to sit. Jake opened his mouth, rehearsed words ready to spill forth, but the surge of urgency overrode his carefully crafted lines. "I'm not here to point fingers," he started, his voice trembling slightly. "I want to talk about our stories. We have narratives that might just shift how decisions are made in this town." The mayor narrowed his eyes, and Jake saw the flicker of skepticism mirrored in the contours of his face. "Stories can be used to sway opinions, Jake. You sure this is the route you want to take?" The challenge was unmistakable, a warning layered beneath a seemingly innocuous question. Stifling the swell of doubt that threatened to engulf him, Jake took a deep breath and pressed on. "You're right. But I believe these stories are real. They hold truths about who we are, not just what we need. We're not asking for sympathy. We're demanding acknowledgement." For a brief moment, something akin to interest sparked in the mayor's eyes. In that fleeting instant, Jake could feel the tension twist into an opportunity. He seized it, recounting specific instances of struggle and resilience within the community. As he spoke, the tremor in his voice softened and steadied, fueled by the very authenticity he feared might shatter. But beneath the flow of his words, a trickle of anxiety whispered questions back to him. Was the mayor truly listening, or simply biding his time until Jake exited his office? When Jake finished, silence enveloped them, thick and palpable, each tick of the clock dragging the moment into a sprawling infinity. Uncertainty began creeping back to the surface, an unsettling companion that would not be silenced. "I hope you understand the risk in bringing this to light," the mayor finally replied, his authority looming. "You could expose vulnerabilities we aren't ready to confront." With that, the earlier confidence wavered, and Jake felt a lump rising in his throat. Was he walking into a minefield, the sincerity of his intentions met with resistance? The meeting had begun as a dialogue for change, yet the undercurrents hinted at a much graver reality lurking beneath. As he sat there, wrestling internally with the mayor's response, Jake realized that this confrontation reached far beyond the political. It challenged him to stand firm against the fears that sought to undermine him. Each pulse of doubt was a clear call, beckoning him to clarify his convictions. Would he falter under pressure, or lean into the rawness of his truth, hardened by the very struggles he'd brought forth? In that charged moment, the stakes were clear. He was not just presenting a narrative, but entrenching a new identity. But could he bear the weight of such responsibility, and was he prepared for the consequences that would inevitably follow? The air thickened with anticipation, a simmering tension between the possibility of acceptance and the fear of rejection hanging heavily in the room. As Jake awaited the mayor's answer, he suddenly found himself grappling with an unforeseen truth. There were depths within him yet to explore, and choices to make that would shape the rest of his journey. In the silence that ensued, a startling realization shimmered to the surface. What if he didn't just strike a blow for his community, but uncovered something profound about his own resilience? What remained unsaid threatened to shake the very foundation of Jake's newfound determination, leaving him to wonder just how far he was willing to go to embrace his truth. The mayor's gaze lingered on Jake, contemplating his words with a scrutiny that felt both penetrating and judgmental. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity, each heartbeat a reminder of the stakes involved. Jake's resolve was being tested, but alongside the trepidation was a burgeoning sense of purpose. He understood now that the authenticity he'd feared losing was his greatest ally. "I appreciate your concerns, Mayor," Jake began, his voice steadier than before. "But acknowledging our vulnerabilities could spark the change we desperately need. It's not just about exposing weaknesses, it's about illuminating our strength in unity." The mayor's brow furrowed, a moment of contemplation stretching longer than Jake anticipated. "Strength, you say, but sometimes strength means keeping quiet and preserving the status quo." Jake leaned forward, the fervor rising within him. "And sometimes it means breaking the silence that lets suffering fester unseen. My own discomfort pales in comparison to the voices of those I've met, those whose stories have been buried under the weight of indifference. I owe it to them to ensure those stories are heard." For the first time, the mayor appeared to genuinely consider Jake's passion. The hesitation in his expression hinted that he recognized the potential impact of Jake's proposition. Yet still, the specter of doubt loomed large. "What you're suggesting could lead to repercussions, Jake. Are you ready to stand by your narrative in front of an audience that may not share your views?" Jake clenched his fists under the table, acutely aware of the potential backlash. Did he possess the tenacity to withstand the scrutiny? The question reverberated through his mind, but now it felt less like an obstacle and more like an opportunity for growth. "I'm not here to speak solely for myself. If I falter, I'll take that hit. But if it means that the unresolved struggles and triumphs of my community can find voice, then I become more than the sum of my fears." The silence stretched on, a battlefield for his convictions. Jake felt the weight of his words, laden with truth that had the potential to unsettle the very foundations on which the mayor had built his policies. He wasn't just fighting for acceptance from an authoritative figure, he was contesting his identity, unearthing the courage to redefine it. "Then let's see how we can navigate this together," the mayor finally replied, his voice tempered with cautious optimism. "We can hold an open forum, allow the community to share their narratives, but understand this. I won't protect you from the consequences. This is a collaboration, and it may lead to unexpected challenges." Jake nodded slowly as he absorbed the gravity of the concession. It was a significant breakthrough, but it invited uncertainty. How would he prepare himself for the storm of opinions that would undoubtedly follow? The thrill of the potential collaboration sat uneasily alongside the fear of backlash. "Thank you for considering this," Jake said, the words escaping with newfound sincerity. Yet he couldn't shake the quickening pulses of anxiety at the edges of his mind. The meeting was only the beginning. He had taken one brave step, but countless more loomed ahead, each demanding a level of courage he had yet to fully own. As he exited the mayor's office, the distinct sounds of the town hall felt amplified, reverberating through him with urgency. He was stepping into a new realm, one that promised both confrontation and discovery, where every conversation would challenge his perceptions and drive his development. Determined to prepare for the open forum, he began considering how to articulate not just his own story, but those of others, knowing they would depend on him to amplify their voices. He felt the tapestry of narratives intertwining around him, urging him to rise above anxiety and seek intentionality. But in the recesses of his mind, a faint echo of fear persisted. What if he failed those stories? What if, in the pursuit of authenticity, he lost sight of his own? The thought tightened his chest, compelling him to dig deeper, to ensure that he was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. He returned to the office, the shadows lengthening with the settling afternoon light, each corner reflecting the uncertainties that still mirrored his own. The echoes of his last conversation loomed, igniting a new resolve as he sat down to outline his next steps. And there it was, a realization meant to transform his journey. The path to personal enlightenment would not just unfold through speaking, but through listening. What lessons would he uncover from the depths of his community's narratives? How would these insights reshape his understanding of strength? In the soft glow of his office desk lamp, anticipation blended with a whisper of fear, each mingling to form a potent charge. He could sense the approach of a challenge unlike any he had confronted before. The time had come to face the stories of others. How well could he prepare, not just to tell, but to truly hear what would undeniably unfold next? Jake stood at the edge of the town square, where weathered brick buildings exuded history and the air crackled with burgeoning anticipation. The sun hung low in the sky, bathing the familiar surroundings in a warm golden hue. Today was not just another day. It was the day of the open forum, the culmination of all the planning, conversations, and courageous strides he had taken since confronting his truths. His heart drummed with excitement and apprehension. What lay ahead would either forge him anew or unravel the very fabric of what he had dared to build. As townsfolk began to gather, a wave of voices washed over him, a myriad of familiar and uncertain faces merging into one collective energy. Each individual carried their unique narrative, tales potentially overshadowed by the rigid expectations that had hung over this community like a weight. In the midst of that crowd, Jake felt a sense of purpose surge within him. It was his moment to step into the light, to wield the stories of his community like a banner of solidarity. He took a deep breath, steadying himself as he approached the microphone. He was no longer the man defined solely by the butcher's shop. He was an advocate, a vessel for change. The mayor's reluctant agreement lingered in his mind, a guideline he intended to transform into actionable purpose. He sought to share his vision, not just in spoken words but in authentic connection, aimed at shattering the stillness born from years of silence. "Thank you all for being here today," he started, his voice echoing in the stillness that blanketed the square. "We stand together on the foundation of our stories." Jake could feel the collective heartbeat of the crowd, their breaths in sync with his intention. "My hope is that today we allow our voices to intertwine, creating a narrative that holds space for every struggle and triumph this community has faced." He paused, catching the eye of Lena in the crowd, a steady beacon of support. The path he was carving had not only broadened his understanding of himself, but had also forged bonds he would have previously deemed impossible. The validation he felt reassured him that he was no longer an isolated figure battling antiquated norms. "I want to share a personal story," he continued, channeling the energy that pulsed through his being. "For too long, I have lived in the shadows of my profession, feeling the weight of judgment from those who cannot see the artistry in the craft of butchery. But what I've realized, what I must prove, is that behind every cut of meat lies a deep respect for life, for sustenance. My profession is a sacred one, and it demands dignity, just like each of your stories deserves to be told, to be valued." As he spoke, the resonance of his words drew the crowd in closer. Faces marked by confusion began to soften, the barriers built from fear, and preconceived notions starting to dissolve. Individuals were nodding, contemplating the gravity of his declaration. Jake felt their collective transformation mirroring his own. It was both exhilarating and humbling. "Lena has shown me that love transcends cultural boundaries. Together, we've borne the scars of scrutiny, but we've also learned the beauty of solidarity and connection." He glanced at Lena again, and her encouraging smile filled him with strength. "And now, I invite you, my dear friends, to share your experiences, your truths, so we can grow together." Jake stepped back from the microphone to allow others to speak, to let their truths flow into that hallowed space he had created. The first person to step forward was a middle-aged woman whose voice trembled with the weight of lost dreams. She shared her struggles as a single mother, the harsh whispers that had stalked her every move, yet her resolve illuminated her spirit. One after another, the stories poured forth, filling the square with raw admissions of vulnerability, resilience, and the collective desire for change. Jake realized that each tale was a brick laid in the foundation of a burgeoning community, a statement of purpose held in a hopeful embrace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere hummed with energy. The town square had transformed into more than a physical space. It had become a crucible for healing, a shared journey toward understanding and acceptance. And as Jake spoke for the final time, he expressed gratitude not just for the courage of each storyteller, but for witnessing his evolution along with theirs. The mayor's presence in the back was almost a specter now, overshadowed by the transformative power of the community's voices. "Let's continue this dialogue," he urged, feeling the swell of shared resolution crackling in the air. "Let this be the beginning, not just of new stories, but of a new narrative woven by those willing to stand for truth." As the crowd dispersed, conversations continued to spark, laughter echoed in the streets, and Jake sensed a change embedded in the very essence of Flathead. In those fleeting moments, he had truly achieved something monumental, not recognition for himself, but empowerment for the many voices yearning to be heard. He no longer saw himself merely as a butcher or a man weighted down by tradition. He was a catalyst for change, a creator of connections that transcended the judgments cast upon him. With Lena and Anaya by his side, he felt an unwavering sense of purpose, the beginning of a new chapter that was, at last, his to write. Jake smiled as the last remaining townsfolk began to filter out of the square, voices fading into the embrace of the night. He had transformed beyond all anticipation, conquering self-doubt with every spoken word, and the feeling of fulfillment suffused through him, a recognition that he was finally living the life he had once only dared to imagine. And in that moment, he understood the power of his journey. It was not just about overcoming societal judgment, but about creating an environment where authenticity could flourish, a resilience that spoke to change, unity, and understanding. Now was the time to solidify the bonds he had begun to forge, to support those who had lent their voices to this cause. As the stars emerged in the tranquil sky above, Jake felt an unwavering certainty within him. This was just the beginning, and he was ready for whatever came next. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. True fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.